following the apprehending of convicted rapist and murderer Thabo Bester, who escaped a C-Max facility last year. His suspected accomplice and a Mozambican national in Tanzania were arrested on Friday evening. Now, a high-level delegation will travel to Tanzania to begin with the extradition processes, which takes us to the core of our Twitter poll question today, where we asked you your expectations from this case, whether you think justice will in fact prevail, whether or not you think SAPS will botch the case, or whether or not you think Bester will escape again. And our preliminary results currently show that 15% of you think that justice will prevail, 47% believe that SAPS will in fact botch the case, while 38% believe that Bester will likely escape again. Well, what does this say about public confidence in our policing services? The POPCRU spokesperson Richard Mamabolo joins me now to weigh in on that question. Richard, you heard the results of that, or the preliminary results rather, of that Twitter poll. 47% of participants believing that SAPS is likely to botch this case. Your response to that?
Good morning to you and the viewers. Look, considering the fact that this has been a high-profile case which has been broadcasted everywhere, we doubt that there would be any botching of the case. In fact, we should actually welcome the fact that there has been a rearrest that was made. And of course, I think the process leading towards actually ensuring that Mr. Bester is brought back into the country is something that we're looking towards. I think this is also a relief actually for the victims, but as well as the general public, in that at least there has been some measure taken in ensuring that he is brought to book. But again, it comes at after a huge embarrassment that was suffered by both government and specifically the Department of Correctional Services, because you would remember that even during the past week, G4S was still insistent that Mr. Bester had died in his cell, while the Department of Correctional Services was saying something different. So that as well has got an impact on public confidence around how our correctional centers operate. And of course, I think the other question that comes about is issues around our border control processes, because he would have been caught about 2 countries out of South Africa. So those are some of the things that definitely need to be looked into. I think the main focus now should be channeled towards actually investigating, doing some internal investigations, and actually looking into what measures or steps were taken and by who would have assisted to aid Mr. Bester to escape. I think that's where the primary focus should be. And of course, I think if we can spend more time focus on that, there would be definite revelations that would actually reveal the extent of the rot that is within our correctional centers. The reason why we are also saying that the Department of Correctional Services needs to take accountability is because when you enter into a public-private partnership, there is what you call a Correctional Services Act, which stipulates around what guidelines should be obeyed by these private companies. And clearly, from what has been happening, it is quite clear that the DCS has not been doing its duty of ensuring that they monitor and actually ensure that this private company complies with all the prescripts therein. So we as a union as well feel that we should deal away with the privatization of these private prisons, because the role of rehabilitation is a constitutional mandate given by the Constitution, and we feel that private prisons do not have the interest of rehabilitating.
Right.
As opposed to
Richard, sorry, I have to interject there, because it's starting to sound a little bit like a train that's getting away from us. There's a lot that you've given us, and I really would like to unpack each and every single one of those points that you've made. The starting being the fact that you, by characterizing this particular case as being a high-profile case, that nature alone dictating that this will undoubtedly be, a successful case for the police. I mean, we've got, a history of botched cases by police when they're conducting their work. When we look at the Senzo Meyiwa case, for instance, it took the police years to even find suspects in connection to the murder of Senzo Meyiwa. And now that we're in the trial phase of this particular case, we're noticing that the crime scene was potentially contaminated by those initial initial respondents who arrived on the scene, not to mention more recently AKA's murder out in Durban, the fact that we haven't received much information or updates from police with regards to that. So to say that the high-profile nature of a case alone will dictate success simply isn't enough. Your response to that?
Look, I think the complexity of investigations within the SAPS are quite broad, and of course one case would differ from the other. But generally we do know that there has been a very high conviction rate within the SAPS. It might be that there are certain cases which are not, might not seem to be going according to plan, but again, you remember that some of these investigations which are done are quite confidential. So we would not necessarily be at liberty to actually specify as to what might have been the challenges or the delays therein with regards to certain cases. But I think with this one, it's quite different from the Mayua case and the AK case, because the person has been caught, the person is alive, and the person is being brought to book. However, this does not necessarily say that there were no flaws, because I think for the fact that the person had escaped for over just close to a year now, is embarrassing enough to suggest that the confidence that is within the criminal justice cluster in its entirety would have declined.
All right, well, talking about that confidence, you know, when Justice Minister Ronald Lamola and Police Minister Bheki were informing the public about these arrests, I mean, it did appear to, you know, take on a tone of a congratulatory tone, so to say, you know, to say that we finally nabbed this individual. But questions are still arising. One of those being whether or not it was South African police intelligence that actually facilitated the arrest of these individuals, or if it was just Tanzanian authorities being vigilant and alert to what's been happening in South Africa. And I say that because our own police services could not nab these individuals when they were within South African borders, when they were still within our own jurisdiction. So what's your response to that? Is it really a vote of confidence for policing services in this country?
Look, I don't think it's something that we should be celebrating. We should not take it in a celebratory mood, because I think it's actually an embarrassment, actually. It's an indictment. That is why we're saying that there should be some level of self-introspection done into the systems around our correctional centers, as well as investigative capacities as well. Those are some of the issues that we think need to be reflected on. He was not arrested by the South African Police Service. He was arrested in a different country. And therefore, of course, we do applaud the fact that law enforcement officials within that state did take action, but as well, I think coming back to our state of the criminal justice cluster, it's something that needs to be really reflected on, so that we work towards building confidence. At the moment, there's nothing to celebrate, really. If different individuals would have felt that is something to celebrate, I doubt they should be, because I think we've been under a lot of embarrassment in the past few days, especially emanating from the very same case. That is why I'm saying that we would be confident that they would then take the corrective measures to ensure that this case is not botched as compared to different other cases as well.
Well, and to the point that you made, Richard, around, you know, an overhaul of these private security companies essentially taking on the responsibility of securing these CMAX security prisons. I want us to talk a little bit about that, because as a union you have criticized the government quite scathingly on the fact that they outsource these responsibilities to private security companies. We know that the EFF has reiterated a similar call, asking government to essentially stop outsourcing these responsibilities to private security companies. What is your particular issue with that approach? We know that financially a lot of these departments, including the Department of Correctional Services, is financially overstretched with the number of inmates that form part of the Correctional Services department, essentially. You know, there aren't a lot of resources to go around, and so outsourcing is a means by which they try to mitigate that particular problem. What's your solution to what is appearing to be a conundrum for the department?
In fact, the outsourcing of corrective measures is actually an expensive an exercise. government spends over R1 billion on a yearly basis just on the two private prisons in the country. So an inmate, they spend over R400 per inmate in that facility. Whilst, within the normal prisons, you would have a lesser spending of resources. So we think that these resources could then be channeled towards ensuring that we improve on the capacity of our current correctional centers, as opposed to having funding a private prison, which of course again I would repeat that its mandate is not to rehabilitate, but rather to actually maximize profits. So the difference is that we've got a legal framework which actually ensures that our correctional centers are there to actually ensure there's the rehabilitation, whilst these private prisons are not there for that. They are there for profit maximization. So there is a difference, really. In fact, there have also been a lot of human rights abuses that have been reported from within the very same prisons. That is why we feel that the contract can no longer be extended. We feel that it should be ended with immediate effect.
Do we know, Richard, comparatively, when we look at prisons that are manned by public officials versus prisons that are manned by private security companies, that rate of rehabilitation, do we know comparatively if it is better where facilities are manned by public officials versus the private security companies? I've noted the fact that you've mentioned that human rights abuses have been reported in that regard. But if we're talking about rehabilitation, and we know that that is at the core of what our correctional facilities are trying to do in dealing with inmates, what are the rates comparatively?
Look, there have been a number of challenges facing our correctional centers, and of course these are some of the things that we've been engaging with the commissioner about. And some of the things include the fact that there's overcrowding and understaffing as well. So those are some of the issues that actually will have got an hindrance on the rate of rehabilitation that can be done within our correctional centers. And of course, I think the reality is that there's an 85% reoffending rate within our correctional centers, which demonstrates that there is no capacity there. There's no capacity to rehabilitate. But we have since been working closely with the Department of Correctional Center Services to ensure that there are programs which in the near future would yield certain positive outputs, which include ensuring that inmates do not lie idle, and of course inmates are skilled within correctional centers, so that at the time when they are released, they can therefore sustain themselves. So one of the programs that we have is to ensure that our correctional centers become self-sustainable, and I think it might not take short term, but in the long term, we believe that it will also actually yield positive results, and this is something that we're closely working with the department with.
Right. Well, back to the latest development, Richard. Police Minister Begicele yesterday, when he was, of course, briefing the South African public, he mentioned that the police would be initiating a broader investigation into what has happened with Thabo Bester's escape, including investigations right to the top, because there's a belief, or at least, that the rot may run all the way to the top, given how brazen and how wide this escape has essentially become. Your thoughts on the sort of punitive measures that, as a union, you would like to see, should indeed it be discovered that there are, in fact, big fishes, really, that are involved in regards to what happened with this escape?
Yeah, look, we definitely would welcome the investigation, and of course for us it's quite important. We can no longer trust internal investigations that were done by, for example, G4S had an internal investigation last year, which led to the suspension of different individuals. Now this matter should definitely be in the hands of the police, and of course a broad investigation should look into actually establishing the deep rot that has been within these facilities. And of course I think whether there are senior people involved or not, it's something that we'll still have to wait and see. But it's quite clear that with the kind of prison that we have in Mangaung, it would have been humanly impossible for anybody to escape unless they were aided by people who would have been employed within the facility. So it's something that we will definitely welcome, and of course this will obviously serve as a lesson as well as to the kinds of people that we have working within those centers, and of course the levels of influences that would have obviously resulted in Mr. Bester escaping. Not only his escape though, but as well as the actually investigating as to whose body was it that was taken to the very same cell that Mr. Bester was supposed to be in. So it's something that we'll definitely welcome. We're anticipating thoroughly, and we think that it will also as well create an impression that even those who might think that they are untouchable will definitely have to face the might of the law.
Right. Richard, thank you so much for coming on to our program this morning. That's the POPCRU spokesperson, Richard Mamabolo.